Okay, hello everyone. So, where we left off last week is we're in the mimer from the Alter Rebbe titled Patach Eliyahu, and we were discussing the 10 spheros of Atzilus, and how in the introduction to the Tikkunei Zohar in Patach Eliyahu they are referred to as these 10 garments. And we explained, using the mashal, the analogy of the essence of the soul, how the garments for the essence of the soul, which would be the intellect and the emotions of the soul, are called garments which reveal. They're garments which are unified with the essence of the soul when the essence of the soul joins with them, and they express and enhance, they reveal that which the soul is trying to express. And we gave the example of like cosmetics, that when you put on a cosmetic, it actually becomes one with your skin, and it enhances, it reveals a person's beauty. And this was different than the thought, speech, and action of a person, because the thought, speech, and action of a person, it's also a garment, but that is a garment which actually conceals the unity, the purity, the specialness of the energy which is being conveyed. So now we're going to bring it to the nimshal. We're going to go back to the spiritual realms, to the spheros. So the Alter Rebbe writes, Valderech Zeh, he says, Valderech Zeh, Yuvan Gam L'mayla B'Yud Spheros, based on what was said above, we can understand that even above, in the 10 spheros, Shenikra Tikkunin, which are called garments, unifying, garments which are unified. This is specifically referring to the spheros of Atzilus, the chachma and the emotions of spheros of Atzilus, in which him and his garments, the vessels, are one. That God and the vessels, the energy which is being held in that space, are totally unified. But Bria Yitzira Asiya, the lower worlds, Hein Bechinas Levushin Mamish, they're what are called literal garments, that are garments which conceal. And about them, it said in the introduction to the Tikkunei Zohar, Levushin Tikinaslan, that Hashem fashions these garments. So these garments of the lights of the lower realms are already garments which are revealing, or which are concealing, garments which are already like something else. Okay, so now we're going to begin to discuss I guess you could say like the function of Atzilus. What is Atzilus coming to do? So he begins, says, Kihine, Antu Chakim. This is another section, the next section of the introduction to the Tikkunei Zohar. We say, Antu Chakim, you, speaking of Hashem, you are wise. We say, you are wise, but without knowable wisdom. So Pirush, Antu, Saidia, you are. Hainu Arin Saif. This represents the Arin Saif, the infinite godly energy beyond Atzilus. And this infinite godly energy is chakim, is called wise. Shenimshach bebechinas chachma, because this godly energy is now it's being drawn down, it's coming into this space, this dimension, this new dimension, which is called chachma. Al derech b'makim she'ata maitzig dulasei. And this is connected with the saying of our sages. It says, the place that you will find Hashem's greatness, you will also find his humility, and we will touch on that some more later. But this Arin Saif, which is coming into this space of Chachma, this dimension of Chachma, is now it's called wise. V'adayin, but still, Einai Chakim b'Chachma Yadiya. It's not called wise with any knowable wisdom. Ela shenikra Chakim, rather it's just called wise. Lefishahu makar ha'Chachma, because this space, it's so lofty, so godly, it's beyond being the source of any individual idea or any individual concept of wisdom. It's just the source of all knowable wisdom. So it's still in this realm of being beyond knowable wisdom because it's the source, but it's still, because it's the source of wisdom, it's called wise. And this space, it's Lefishu Makar Chachma Umimenu, and from this space of the source of Chachma is drawn Hamshachas Chachma B'Biyah, is drawn the Chachma of the lower worlds, of Bria Yitzira Asiya. Hagam She'ein Araya Chachma De Bria Chulu Ukol Shekein Dasiya, even though even the Chachma of Bria, of the world right under Atzilus, it's totally incomparable to the Chachma of Atzilus, to this emanated Chachma, and even more so the Chachma of Asiya, of our physical world. The wisdom of our physical world is incomparably lower to the wisdom of Atzilus. But still, this Chachma of Atzilus, this wisdom is still it's still called wise because it's going to be a source for all of the wisdom which is going to be trickling down into the lower worlds. And because it's a source for knowable wisdom, it's called wise. And the Alter Rebbe is going to give this really beautiful mashal for the idea. He says, this idea can be understood in a mashal, through a mashal, mimasha amar azal, from that which our sages say, Ein lecha kol esav chulu v'gavaya ma'al gavaya chulu. So basically, in Bereshis Rabbah, our sages say that every single plant that grows has a spiritual entity, a mazel, which is standing above it and hitting it and saying, grow. So all things which are growing have their unique energy, which are causing them to grow. And he's connecting this to another pasuk from Koheles. He brings part of the pasuk Gavaya Ma'al Gavaya to say that each one of these like levels of mazalim, of energies, they have also on top of them, they have another higher spiritual energy which is quote unquote hitting them and telling them to grow, meaning bringing down energy to them. And at every level, there's always this higher level drawing energy down from the higher to the lower. So with this idea, if we look at a physical apple, an apple, yesh by matikas v'chich eichel, it has a sweetness to it, and it has a taste to it. When you eat it, it tastes sweet. So ha'im namar sheyesh b'kayach hatzeimeach asher be'eretz tamu matikas gamkein. Are we going to say that in the power of growth in the earth and in the land of itself, there's also a sweetness and a certain taste, like a taste of apple? Are we going to say that, oh, all apple trees taste like apples? Upashita b'mazel, and then definitely with the mazel she'enim erachum huzak klal. And with regards to like the spiritual entity which is empowering, giving energy to this particular apple tree to grow apples, how are we going to say about that it has a sweetness or a certain type of taste from it? Where is the taste of the sweetness of the apple even coming from? So he says something very interesting. He says that the sweetness and the taste of the fruit actually comes before the fruit itself. He says, Ella ha'inyanhu, the idea is shehamatikais, that sweetness, the idea of all sweetness, in reality, nimshach michesed, is drawn from the sphere of chesed. Umiriroi, and bitterness, migvura, is drawn from the sphere of gevura. So when this just like archetype, parameter of sweetness or bitterness, in its source, it's totally above, it's totally beyond, being limited to the sweetness of apples or the sweetness of oranges or the bitterness of, mara or something bitter. It's this just general idea of sweetness and this general idea of bitterness. And in the space that this source of sweetness and bitterness is, that's still a spiritual space, the chesed and the gevur, and its source, it's spiritual energies, but it's only rak shebashtalshalos v'seder yeridas hamadregas mimadrega achar madregas, through this progressive descent from level to level, from these spiritual levels down. At every single point, the sweetness is niskashmu. It becomes progressively more physical. Ad shenimshach mebechinas chesed mitikais, until you can literally have like a literal taste of sweetness from the spiritual concept of chesed. Because at every point in ishtalshalos, it becomes more grounded. The sweetness becomes less sublime and lofty and more actually attached to specific things. And even though the sweetness of an apple is totally incomparable to the sweetness of the chesed of Atzilus, it still is within this subject, this parameter of sweetness now. It shares that same title. It shares that same definition of sweetness, that from this idea of chesed, of giving, you have also this idea of sweetness. And from that will trickle down, even though it's right now, as it is, the spiritual is totally incomparable to the physical, but from that source, sweetness of chesed, you will eventually reach this point of physical sweetness. As we see, we have many different types of sweetness and like a pleasurable experience in spirituality as well. Like the pleasure of the delight that someone has in an idea, and a new idea, and a wisdom. Who gamkin metikas is also called a sweetness. V'chein tainug shel nigan, and also the pleasure of a nice song. It's also called a nigan. It's also called sweetness. Shu min hakol hayaytzim min alev b'chinas hamidai, says it's from the voice, which is coming from the heart, which is an aspect of the emotions. So we see even with spiritual, intellectual, and emotional levels, we have this level of sweetness. It's not a physicalized type of sweetness where it can be now subject to, oh, this apple is now sweet. That at various grades, you have at one higher grade, you have the sweetness of an idea. And then at a still more spiritual but a lower grade, you can have the sweetness of a song coming from the heart. And eventually, you're going to reach down to a point where you have the sweetness of an apple, or the sweetness of a candy, or whatever it might be in a physical realm. And yeah, Vilachain, therefore, B'kama Yuridis Vishtalshalos Nasa Metikas Gashmi. Through these progressive descents and these chain-like descending of levels, you eventually reach a space where you have physical sweetness, mamish. Hagam shehefresh v'hevdol rav b'neim. Even though there's a massive, incomparable separation between the sweetness of chesed and the sweetness of an apple, but it has a source where it's now coming from. V'kachu inyan v'chinas chachma. And the idea is the same type of way it works with regards to chachma. Sheyesh ba gamkin gevaya mal gevaya. That chachma also, at each level, you have a higher chachma, a higher, more sublime, transcendent, spiritual dimension of chachma energy, which is being drawn down. V'agam sha chachma debriya einei me'erech v'lei muhus chachma niras v'nigles basiya. And even though the chachma of bria that we have is totally incomparable to, and totally of a different substance, of the knowable and revealed wisdom that we have in this physical world, our idea of wisdom in this physical world is totally, like, incomparably lower and like of no substance to the wisdom of bria. If we would all go to bria and try to say an idea over there, it wouldn't look like anything. Or if we experience like someone sharing an idea in bria, we would totally not be able to understand what's even going on, because our idea of sharing an idea is totally like lower and of no substance to that idea in chachma. But even so, mikol makayim hu makar v'shayresh, it's still a source lias b'mena is havas b'chinas chachma dasiya niglas, for there to be a revealed chachma in the lower world. That even though if we go up to a higher space, we won't be able to understand the wisdom which is being shared in that space. But that wisdom is still a source for the wisdom that we can understand. So they have this intrinsic type of connection. V'kachu ha'chachma d'Atzilus, and the same type of ways with the chachma of Atzilus. Im hayais shu b'chinas chachim b'lev chachma yediyah. Even though it is called wise without knowable wisdom, because the wisdom in that space can't be known, that's how high and spiritual of an energy we're dealing with. Even so, mikol makayim hu b'chinas makar de makar. It's still what could be called the source of a source, that it's the source of the chachma of bria, which is then going to be a source for the chachma of Yitzir and the chachma of Asiya. So because Atzilus contains within it, the chachma of Atzilus contains within it the source of all of these progressively lower levels, it has an intrinsic connection to the lowest level. And what the Alter Rebbe is explaining here is, you could really apply it to the entire experience of Atzilus, that Atzilus is basically this interface between infinite, unknowable godly energy and knowable godly energy, the way that we're able to see God and connect with Hashem in all the things that we experience and all the things that we encounter, is specifically because we have this world of Atzilus, in which the source of all attributes, which can be applied to all the physical things that we're going to find in this reality, like the apples being sweet, or ideas being sweet, or songs being sweet. That is all coming from the chesed of Atzilus, manifest into our reality of now we have an idea of sweetness, or the idea of wisdom, people sharing wisdom, or books having wisdom. That's all being sourced in the chachma of Atzilus, or the gevura of Atzilus. It's the source of all the severity, the restraint, the rulership, whatever it might be in this world, the judgment. We can trace everything back to these 10 core archetypes, these spheres of Atzilus, in which all of the individualized energy which we can experience in this world, and all of the ways that we can find God and all of that energy, it's all coming back to that space. So the question is really, how does this work? To get from a space of infinite godly energy to the point of having individual dimensions of godly energy being revealed in this type of way, or in that type of way. So he says, Avaliyas antu chakim, for the antu to become chakim, for Hashem, for the infinite Arin Saif, the godly energy, this endless godly energy to now be drawn into wisdom. Dainu amshachas Arin Saif b'chachma, hini hachma mamish ma'ayin timatze. The chachma literally needs to be found from ayin. It's being born as this. There's this tiny point of now. There's this thing called wisdom being born out of this immense space of godly energy, which compared to that, like the point of wisdom, it's coming from the space of ayin. There's no thing that's there yet. It's just this total space of beyond, the space of godly light. So to have chachma coming from that space, it's called chachma coming from an ayin. The chachma is being found from the space of no thing, of just godly energy, undefined. V'lachein, and this is drawing back to what you said earlier about the place where we find Hashem's greatness. We also find His humility. V'lachein b'chinas ani vayseinu yisparich. Ani vais naisai. Ani vais naisai. It's a hard word to say. But it's basically, it's saying that Hashem's humility is found in that space. Shu yurida gedayla lefanav yisparich. Because to come from a space of this infinite godly light to the point to being all drawn down into the single point of this first yesh of chachma, that's considered a massive descent for the godly energy, because all of the godly energy is being limited into just this single point. Now at the same time, it's also the greatness, because from our perspective, we look at it, it's the source of known reality. It's starting at chachma, it's this really high lofty point, but compared to all the godly energy above, it's called it's a representation of God's humility. And this is why the word Atzilus in Lashon HaKodesh, it connotes this idea of lowering oneself, of being, of weakening, of coming lower from a higher level to a lower level. Ba'ashifla madrega halyayna, lowering oneself from a higher level, lahashbala atzmai, to draw oneself down, to weaken oneself, so to speak, iluhu b'madrega pechusa, as if that they were now on a lower level. It's taking on the appearance, it's a higher thing, taking on the appearance of being at a lower level. Ukamai va'atzalti min haruach, as we bring in, it's brought in Parshas Bamidbar, that Hashem tells Moshe that I will emanate from the Spirit. To Gabe Moshe, that with regards to Moshe, that the story is that the Jews were asking Moshe for meat. They were in the desert and they wanted meat. Dilafisha Amar Ma'ayin Li Basar. That because they asked, from where are we going to find meat? Ma'ayin Li Basar. Or Moshe asked that, where am I going to get meat? Shahaisa Madrega, because Moshe was at a level, B'mayla Halyayna, that was way higher than even having any connection, any shaykhs to physical stuff. Moshe is not from this high, massive state that he's at. He's totally beyond drawing himself down to a state of like making meat for people. It's like this physical thing. It's like he's so above that. So what happens? What does he do? Lakach Amar Lai Kadosh Baruch Hu. Therefore, what does Hashem tell him? Hashem says, Asfa li shivim ish. Gather for me 70 people, Shem b'madrega pechusa, which are on a lower level than Moshe. Hainu shelayu misgashmim mamish, So that Moshe is not actually drawing himself down into this physicality so much because he's above even being drawn down into that space. So in order for him not to do this, Hashem tells him to bring these 70 people. And he says, Elavad, salti min haruach, I will emanate from your spirit, asher alacha, which is upon you. Vasamti aleim, and I will place it upon them. Pirsha oirid va'amshich, bechinas shelcha, shi'elamatam v'drigasacha. That I will draw down and descend this energy which is upon you so that it will be upon a level which is below you.